I still remember the smell of our old kitchen, a mix of brewed coffee, floor polish, and the faint scent of lavender from the air freshener my mum insisted on buying even when money was tight. That kitchen was the heart of our house, where she stood every morning in her faded blue robe, hair pulled back with one of those claw clips that were always a little crooked, humming old country songs while flipping pancakes. I thought I knew her then. I thought I knew everything about her. But I didn't. The secret she carried for years, hidden in the cracks of her quiet routines, would eventually shatter my entire sense of who I was. Growing up, my mother was the kind of woman who seemed predictable. She had the same grocery list every week, the same television shows she watched at night, the same way she folded laundry with almost military precision. She never raised her voice, never argued with anyone, at least not in front of me. And I believed that her calm, steady way of living meant she was simple, maybe even boring. But sometimes, when I'd come into the room unexpectedly, I'd catch her staring off, her face unreadable, as if her mind was far away in a place I couldn't follow. I'd ask her if something was wrong, and she'd shake her head and smile too quickly, like she had snapped her mask back on. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe she was just tired, or stressed about bills. We never had much money, and she worked long hours at the local pharmacy, so it made sense. But later, I realized those moments were cracks in the facade she was holding together. One memory haunts me now. I was about 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table coloring, while Mum was on the phone in the living room. Her voice was low, urgent, not at all like the soft tone she used with me. I remember hearing her say, "He can't know. Not yet." My little hands froze over the crayons, and my stomach knotted with a feeling I couldn't name back then. When she came back into the room and saw me, she looked startled, almost guilty, then smoothed my hair and asked if I wanted chocolate milk. I pushed that memory aside for years, convincing myself I must have misheard. But when the truth finally came out, those words made horrifying sense. Even as a teenager, I noticed small inconsistencies. Once, I found an envelope tucked between cookbooks in the kitchen cabinet. Inside were old photographs of a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark hair, standing beside my mother at what looked like a summer fair. They were both smiling, her head tilted toward him in a way I had never seen her do with my dad. When I confronted her about it, she snatched the photos away, said they were nothing, just an old friend. But her hands were trembling as she shoved the envelope back into the cabinet. I wanted to press her, but I was young and scared of upsetting her, so I let it go. My mum had always been careful to keep her life measured, quiet, respectable. But looking back, I see how the silence in our home was its own kind of lie. There were whole parts of her I wasn't allowed to see, pieces of her story that were locked away like forbidden drawers I wasn't supposed to open. And when I finally did open them, years later, it felt like the ground fell out from under me. The first real crack in the illusion came when I was 17. It was late spring, a warm evening when the house felt too small with the windows closed, so I sat on the porch steps pretending to study while Mum was inside cleaning up after dinner. My dad had already gone to bed. He always turned in early, exhausted from his job at the factory. I heard the faint buzz of the phone through the open window, and then her voice, sharper than usual, almost desperate. She kept her tone low, but the words carried in the still night air. "I told you not to call me here. If she finds out, it'll destroy everything." I froze. The she mentioned, I realized with a shiver, was me. I remember staring at my math book without seeing a single number, my pulse pounding in my ears. Who was on the other end of that call? What could possibly destroy everything? A part of me wanted to storm inside and demand answers, but fear held me back. Instead, I sat there in the dark, pretending I hadn't heard a thing, while my mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. For days after, I studied her more closely, the way she'd slip out to the backyard to take phone calls, the way she'd quickly minimize a browser window when I walked past the computer. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. It was like watching someone carefully hide the corners of a puzzle, so you could never put the picture together. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. While she was showering, I went into her room, something I almost never dared to do. Her dresser was always neat, everything folded or tucked into its place, but the top drawer held something unexpected. Another envelope, sealed but not tightly. My heart hammered as I pulled out the contents. Inside were more photos of that same man I'd glimpsed years before, along with letters, dozens of them. The handwriting was slanted, masculine, familiar in a way that made my chest ache, though I couldn't place it. Words like, someday, our life, and when she knows, jumped out at me, searing themselves into my mind. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the papers. I stuffed everything back as quickly as I could, terrified she'd catch me, but nothing could erase the images burned into my memory. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, the shadows spinning around the room, feeling like my whole childhood had been built on sand. The woman I thought I knew, the steady, reliable mother who packed my lunches and reminded me to wear sunscreen, was suddenly a stranger. I wanted to hate her, to scream at her for the lies, but another part of me clung desperately to the idea that there had to be some explanation. She wasn't a bad person. She couldn't be. She was my mum. In the weeks that followed, I tried to push it down, to pretend none of it existed, but the letters gnawed at me. Every smile she gave me felt rehearsed, every word too careful. I started avoiding her, spending more time at friends' houses, claiming I needed to study at the library. When she asked what was wrong, I muttered, nothing. Because how could I possibly put into words the way my world was cracking apart? And yet, for all my suspicion, I still wasn't prepared for the day the truth finally hit me full force. It came years later, when I thought I was grown enough to handle anything, but nothing could have prepared me for the secret my mother had been guarding all along. The secret that would unravel not only her life but mine. By the time I turned 21, I had almost convinced myself that whatever my mother was hiding couldn't matter anymore. I was in college, busy with classes and working part-time at a diner, trying to build a life outside the little town where I'd grown up. My relationship with her had become polite but distant. She'd call every Sunday, asking if I was eating well and keeping up with my assignments, and I'd answer with short replies, never daring to bring up the questions that still gnawed at me. But no matter how hard I tried to bury them, the memories lingered. The man in the photos, the letters, the phone calls in the dark. They hovered at the edges of my mind like shadows that never fully disappeared. Then came the night everything changed. It was during winter break, and I'd gone home for the holidays. Dad was asleep in his recliner, the TV flickering softly, when I walked into the kitchen and found my mum sitting at the table with a glass of wine. She almost never drank, so seeing her like that startled me. Her eyes looked tired, and before I could say anything, she whispered, "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." My throat tightened. I sat across from her, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between us. She toyed with the rim of her glass, avoiding my gaze. Finally she said, "The man in those pictures you found, he's your real father." For a moment I thought I hadn't heard her right. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely breathe. She went on, explaining how she had met him before she married the man I called Dad, how their relationship had been complicated, how she had gotten pregnant with me. According to her, he wanted to be part of my life, but circumstances and choices, her choices, had kept him away. She married my dad, who agreed to raise me as his own, and she thought it would be simpler to let the past stay buried. My mind reeled. The man who had kissed my scraped knees, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had worked himself to the bone to keep food on the table, he wasn't really my father. At least not by blood. The room spun, the ground felt unsteady, and I couldn't stop shaking. I remember pushing back from the table, muttering something like, "No, that's not true," before stumbling upstairs to my old bedroom. The walls were still covered in posters from high school, the air stale from months of being closed off, but it felt like a stranger's room now. I curled up on the bed, hugging my pillow, my chest tight with betrayal and confusion. How could she have kept this from me? How could she let me grow up, believing a lie so big it made me question everything about myself? I barely slept that night, tossing and turning under the quilt my grandmother had sewn years ago. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face across the kitchen table, pale and trembling, her words echoing over and over. "He's your real father." By morning, my head ached, and my chest felt hollow, but I couldn't avoid her forever. When I came downstairs, she was already making breakfast, moving around the kitchen like nothing had happened, flipping eggs, buttering toast. The smell of coffee filled the air, and for a second I almost convinced myself it had all been a bad dream. But then she looked at me, her eyes wide and cautious, and the truth slammed back into me. I sat down at the table, my hands clenched around the mug she placed in front of me, and whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She sighed, sitting across from me with a heaviness in her posture I had never noticed before. "I wanted to protect you," she said. "I thought it would be easier if you believed your dad was your father. I didn't want to confuse you or hurt him." Her words stung. Protect me? From my own identity? From the truth of who I was? I shook my head, anger rising like a tide. "You let me grow up thinking a lie. You made me feel crazy every time I noticed something didn't add up. Do you know how that feels?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled back, my chest burning with a mix of sorrow and rage. "Where is he now?" I demanded. "The man in those pictures?" For a long moment she was silent. Then she admitted she had stayed in touch with him, secretly, all these years. They wrote letters, sometimes even spoke on the phone. He lived only a few hours away. My whole body went cold. Not only had she lied to me, but she had kept him close while keeping me in the dark. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping the linoleum. "I need some air," I muttered, and before she could stop me I was out the door. The winter air bit at my face, my breath rising in clouds as I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood streets I had known since childhood. Every house looked smaller, the trees bare and skeletal against the gray sky. Nothing felt safe or familiar anymore. I thought about Dad, about the way he always smelled faintly of engine oil, about the nights he'd fallen asleep reading on the couch, about how proud he looked when I graduated high school. None of that changed, I told myself. He was still the man who raised me. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the pull of the other man, the one whose blood ran in my veins. I felt torn in two, like I belonged nowhere. By the time I returned home, my mum was sitting silently at the table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The smell of eggs had gone cold. She looked up at me with eyes full of fear and guilt, and I realized in that moment that no matter what explanation she gave, nothing would ever make it right. Something between us had broken, maybe forever. The days that followed felt like I was moving through fog. Every word from my mother sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. She tried to act normal, asking if I wanted to go shopping, if I'd help her decorate the tree, but I couldn't bring myself to play along. Each time I looked at her, I saw a stranger. One night, unable to bear the silence between us, I went searching through the attic. The air was cold and dry, the light bulb above me flickering weakly. Boxes were stacked in uneven towers labeled with words like Christmas, school papers, old clothes. In the far corner, hidden behind a stack of blankets, I found a box that had no label at all. My hands trembled as I pulled it forward and lifted the lid. Inside were letters, photographs, and even small gifts still wrapped in paper that had yellowed with time. Every single one was from him, my biological father. Some of the letters were written before I was born, others from years when I was just a child playing downstairs, completely unaware that upstairs my mother was hiding a secret life in cardboard. He wrote about wanting to see me, about birthdays he missed, about the hope that one day she would tell me the truth. My chest tightened as I read his words, tears blurring the ink. I could almost feel the weight of his absence pressing on me. A father who had been out there all along, thinking of me, while I grew up believing he didn't exist. At the bottom of the box was a photograph that shook me more than anything. It was of me, as a toddler, sitting on his lap. My mother stood beside us, smiling in a way I didn't recognize, soft, almost glowing. I had no memory of that day. I had no idea it had ever happened. My knees gave out and I sat on the attic floor clutching the picture, my breath coming in shallow gasps. She had let me forget him. She had built a whole life on top of that erased moment. I wanted to scream, to confront her with the evidence in my hands, but instead I stayed there for what felt like hours, staring at that photo, the edges curled and worn. When I finally came downstairs, she was in the living room folding laundry. I held the picture out to her, my voice shaking. "When were you going to tell me about this?" She froze, her eyes darting to the photo, then back to me. Her hands faltered, dropping a towel onto the floor. For the first time, she didn't have an immediate answer. Her lips parted, but no words came out. And in that silence, I understood that she had never planned to tell me. Not really. She had hoped to carry her secret all the way to the end. She finally spoke after what felt like an eternity, her voice small, almost pleading. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I wanted you to have a normal childhood, to feel secure, to believe you belonged." I stared at her, gripping the photograph so tightly the edges bent. "Normal?" I snapped. "Do you think lying to me about who I am gave me a normal childhood? Do you have any idea how insane this feels?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. For the first time, all the anger I had swallowed for years came spilling out. "You let me grow up thinking Dad was my father, and all the while you were hiding this, letters, pictures, an entire person I was supposed to know." She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back, the photograph trembling in my hand. "Do you know how many times I thought I was crazy, that I was imagining things? When I saw the photos, when I overheard your phone calls, you made me doubt myself. You let me question my own reality." Her face crumpled, and for a moment I saw not my mother, but a woman terrified of losing everything. "I loved him," she admitted softly. "I always loved him. But he couldn't give me the life I needed for you. Your dad, he was stable, dependable, safe. I thought if I gave you that, it would be enough." The words cut through me like shards of glass. She had chosen for me. She had decided what I needed, without ever giving me the chance to know the truth, to decide for myself. I felt like a puppet whose strings had been pulled in secret. My chest ached with betrayal. "So you married Dad out of convenience? Out of some deal to keep your secret?" I demanded. She shook her head quickly, too quickly. "No, it wasn't like that. He loved you as his own. He still does. That's real." But all I could think about was the man in the photographs. The one who had written letter after letter, wanting me, missing me, and how she had kept him from me my entire life. The weight of it pressed down so hard I could barely breathe. I left the house that night without saying another word. The cold air slapped against my face as I walked, my tears freezing on my cheeks. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the lies, the suffocating house that no longer felt like home, away from the woman I thought I knew. I ended up at the diner, where I used to work summers, sitting in a corner booth until sunrise, nursing a cup of coffee that went cold long before I finished it. I stared out the window at the empty parking lot, trying to make sense of my life, trying to imagine what I would even say if I met him, my real father. The next morning my mother tried to call me several times, but I ignored her. I couldn't hear her voice, not yet. Instead, I sat in my car outside the diner, staring at the folded photograph I had stuffed in my jacket pocket. The image felt heavier than paper should, like it carried the weight of everything I thought I knew. I traced the outline of his face with my fingertip, the man who was my father by blood, and wondered how many times I had passed someone on the street who looked like him, who looked like me. After a few hours of circling the town aimlessly, I made a decision. If my mother wouldn't tell me the whole story, I would find it myself. I drove back to the house when I knew my dad would be at work and she would be alone. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her Bible open in front of her like she had been praying. When she saw me, her expression flickered with hope, then fear. I didn't waste time. "Where does he live?" I asked flatly. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. "Please, don't." "Where?" I repeated, louder this time, my chest burning. She hesitated, then finally whispered a town name 2 hours away. I could see in her eyes that she regretted it instantly, but it was too late. I had what I needed. I left before she could stop me, her voice calling my name as I slammed the door. The drive felt unreal, the winter landscape blurring past my windows, bare trees clawing at a gray sky. My stomach was in knots, and every few miles I almost turned back. What if he didn't want to see me? What if he had moved on, started a new family, and I was nothing more than a ghost from the past? But something stronger than fear kept me going, a hunger to know the truth, to finally meet the man my mother had hidden like a forbidden secret. When I pulled into the small town, my hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I parked outside a modest house with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the front door, my heart hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Finally, I forced myself out of the car and walked up the steps. My knuckles hovered above the door, trembling, before I finally knocked. The sound echoed through the quiet street. A few seconds later, the door opened, and there he was. The man who stood in the doorway looked older than the photographs, his hair streaked with gray, lines etched deep into his face, but his eyes were the same. Dark, steady, and hauntingly familiar. For a moment we both just stared at each other, neither of us speaking. My throat felt dry, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. Finally, he said my name. Not a question, but a statement, soft and certain, like he had been rehearsing it for years. I nodded, unable to form words, and something in his expression broke. He stepped aside quickly, motioning me in, and I walked into a living room that smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. The furniture was worn but tidy, photographs lined the mantel. None of them included me. I stood awkwardly, clutching my coat around me, as he closed the door and turned to face me fully. "You look just like her," he said, almost to himself. I knew he meant my mother, but there was something else in his gaze too, something searching. My voice finally cracked through the silence. "Why didn't you ever come for me?" The words were harsher than I intended, but they carried all the weight of years I had spent in confusion and lies. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. I tried. God knows I tried. But your mother, she wanted a different life for you. She thought it would be easier if I wasn't around. He paused, his jaw tightening. She told me to stay away. Said it was what was best for you. Anger flared in my chest, hot and sharp. So you just listened? You just let her erase you from my life? His shoulders slumped, his face weary. I thought I was respecting her wishes. I didn't want to fight her in front of you, drag you through a mess. I thought maybe one day she would tell you and then you'd come find me. My hands curled into fists at my sides, a storm of emotions crashing inside me. Rage at my mother for keeping us apart, resentment at him for not fighting harder, sorrow for the years we lost. But beneath it all there was a strange, aching relief. For the first time I was standing in front of the truth. He motioned for me to sit, and we talked for hours. He told me about his life, the places he had worked, the dreams he once had. He showed me old photos of himself when he was young, ones my mother hadn't kept. I watched his face as he spoke, and saw flashes of myself in his expressions, in the way he leaned forward, in the nervous habit of rubbing his thumb against his palm. It was like finding pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even realized were missing. But even as we spoke, a shadow lingered. He asked about my childhood, about my life with the man I had always called Dad, and I saw regret flash across his face when I answered. He had missed it all, the birthdays, the scraped knees, the graduations, and no amount of words could give that time back. When I finally left his house that evening, the sky was already dark, a thin layer of frost covering the grass. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key, staring at the faint glow of his living room window. Inside that house was a man who had been a ghost in my life, suddenly made real. My chest ached with a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. Relief at finally knowing him, anger at the years we'd lost, and guilt for feeling like I was betraying the father who had actually raised me. On the drive back, the highway lights blurred through my tears. I thought about Dad, about the way he always saved the last piece of pie for me, about how he stood in the crowd at every school play, clapping the loudest. He had no idea that I had sat face to face with the man who shared my blood. The thought of his face if he ever found out made my stomach twist. When I pulled into our driveway, Mum was waiting on the porch wrapped in her old cardigan, her figure tense against the cold night air. She didn't speak as I walked up the steps, just searched my face with eyes full of fear and sorrow. Finally she whispered, "You saw him?" I nodded, too tired and raw to lie. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. But then the memory of her lies slammed back into me, and my sympathy hardened into anger. "Why did you do this?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Why did you steal him from me? Why did you make me grow up thinking half of who I am didn't exist?" She reached for me, her hands trembling. "Because I was scared," she admitted. "I was scared you'd choose him over us. I was scared you'd hate me." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they only fueled my fury. "You should have trusted me," I snapped. "You should have given me the truth, not decided it for me." I stormed past her into the house, slamming the door behind me, the walls echoing with the sound. Upstairs in my room I collapsed on the bed, burying my face in the pillow. My mind spun with images of both men. Dad, steady and dependable, and the stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore, carrying my features in his face. I felt split in two, like I was betraying one no matter which way I turned. For days after, I could barely look at my mother. Every word she spoke sounded false, every gesture tainted by the years of secrets. She hovered around me, trying to start conversations, but I answered with silence. The house felt heavy, suffocating, filled with things unsaid. And all the while the question gnawed at me. Should I tell Dad? Should I shatter his world the way mine had been shattered? Or should I protect him from the truth, the way my mother had tried, no matter how wrong it felt? The weight of the secret pressed on me until I felt like I couldn't breathe. Every time Dad walked into the room, smiling at me, asking if I wanted more coffee or if my car needed gas, guilt clawed at my stomach. He had no idea that the life he built was balanced on a lie. At night I would hear him snoring softly from the bedroom down the hall, and wonder what it would do to him if I told him. Would it destroy him, or would it set him free? I avoided him more than I wanted to admit, leaving the house whenever I could, retreating to old friends or even driving aimlessly just to escape the suffocating tension. But secrets have a way of demanding to be told, and mine sat like a stone in my chest, growing heavier each day. One afternoon, I sat with Mum in the kitchen. She looked pale, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. "Please don't tell him," she whispered. "It will break him." Her voice cracked and I could see the fear etched into her face. "He loves you more than anything. You're his little girl. To him, it doesn't matter whose blood runs in your veins." I wanted to scream that it mattered to me, that knowing the truth had already changed everything, that her lies had robbed me of the chance to know my father when I was young. But I couldn't bring myself to shout. Instead, I sat there in silence, staring at the patterns on the tablecloth we'd had since I was a kid. The blue flowers looked faded now, worn from years of use, much like the life I thought we'd shared. That night, I dreamt of both men. Dad fixing my bike chain in the driveway, sweat dripping from his forehead, and the other man, my biological father, standing at a distance with a look of longing on his face. I woke up in tears, my pillow damp, my chest aching. I realized then that no matter what choice I made, someone would be hurt. Either I would protect Dad by carrying this secret like poison inside me, or I would tell him and watch the world he trusted crumble. For days I wavered, rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining outcomes. My mother begged me with her eyes every time our gazes met, silently pleading for my silence. But the truth has a way of clawing its way out, no matter how hard you try to bury it, and deep down I knew I couldn't keep it from him forever. It happened on a Sunday evening, one of those quiet nights when the world outside seemed frozen in place. Dad was in the living room, half watching the news, his glasses slipping down his nose, while Mum folded laundry in silence. I sat on the edge of the couch, my palms damp, my heart racing. The words I had rehearsed over and over were lodged in my throat, but the silence between us was unbearable. Finally, I blurted out, "Dad, I need to tell you something." He turned his head, raising his brows in that patient way he always did, like nothing I could say would ever make him love me less. The look on his face broke me. My voice trembled as I said the words I had been choking on for weeks. "You're not my real father." The room went still. Mum dropped a towel onto the floor, her face draining of color. Dad's expression flickered, confusion first, then disbelief, then something deeper. Pain, like I had struck him. "What are you talking about?" he asked softly, his voice hoarse. I swallowed hard, tears already stinging my eyes. "Mum told me. I found out. There's another man. He's my biological father." For a long moment he didn't say anything. His hands gripped the arms of the chair, his knuckles white, as though the world was tilting beneath him. Mum began to cry, her sobs breaking the silence, but I couldn't look at her. I could only watch him, the man who had raised me, who had been there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every milestone. His eyes glistened as he finally spoke. "So all these years she lied to me too." His voice cracked, and hearing the hurt in it nearly destroyed me. Mum reached for him, but he pulled away, his shoulders trembling. I wanted to take it back, to unsay the words, but it was too late. The truth was out, and the air in the room was thick with it. "You're my daughter," he said suddenly, looking at me with fierce intensity. "Blood doesn't change that. Nothing changes that." The tears spilled down my cheeks as I nodded, but the pain in his eyes told me everything had already shifted. The life we thought we had was broken, and none of us knew how to put it back together. The days after my confession felt like we were living in the ruins of our old life. Dad moved through the house like a ghost, quieter than I'd ever seen him, his eyes distant even when he tried to smile at me. Mum hovered, desperate to mend what she had broken, but her apologies sounded hollow against the weight of years of lies. At night, I heard muffled arguments behind their bedroom door, Dad's voice low and strained, Mum's cracking with desperation. The sound of it made me curl under my blankets, wishing I could rewind time, wishing the truth hadn't come crashing down on all of us. But there was no going back. I visited my biological father again, this time with less fear and more questions. We walked through a park, the winter air sharp against our cheeks, and he told me about the day I was born, how he had waited by the phone for news that never came, how he had written letter after letter hoping one would reach me. There was sadness in his eyes but also pride when he looked at me, as if he was trying to make up for the years in a single glance. I realized then that meeting him didn't erase the love I had for Dad, the man who had raised me. It just added another layer to who I was. Still, the guilt lingered. Every time I came home I saw Dad sitting in his chair, his shoulders heavier, his silence louder. One evening I sat beside him, clutching his hand. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." He squeezed my fingers gently, his eyes shining. "You didn't hurt me," he said. "She did. But don't ever think for a second that you're not my daughter. I chose you every day, and I'd choose you again." His words broke me open, and I cried into his shoulder, knowing that love like his was rare, that no secret could erase it. As for Mum, my anger hasn't fully faded. Maybe it never will, but I've learnt something through all of this, that secrets don't protect the people we love, they poison them. My mother's secret changed everything, yes, but it also forced me to face the truth of who I am, and to see the strength in the bonds that aren't written in blood but in choice. I don't know what the future holds for my family. Some wounds may never fully heal, but I know this: I will never live in lies. And if I ever have children of my own, I'll tell them the truth, no matter how hard it is, because I've lived through what silence can do, and I refuse to pass that weight on to anyone else.